We'll just wait for that to spin up. All right, so it looks like it's just pondering a little bit to get the recording started. But, thanks again, everybody, for jumping on. This is our first legislative committee meeting for the newly reimagined Colorado Forest Health Council. And I'm happy to lead us through this today. But I think one item on the agenda that I would love to get done today is to elect a committee chair, if that's what the committee would like to do, who will play an important role in helping to decide the agenda for this group, obviously with input from committee members, and work with me to make sure that we get all the materials out as needed. And then, other useful things I thought we might need to do today would be to talk about this committee's duties and scope. We can look at the legislative duties as described, but then have a bit of a brainstorm around this committee's scope and meeting frequency. And then, time allowing, it might be useful to do a little discussion on the 22 ledge session. I have a couple slides sort of summarizing a bunch of the forestry bills that have been moving through. And then if we get to it, start to talk about 23 ledge priorities. Is there anything else that folks would like to add to this agenda or that I've missed?
Sounds good to me.
All right, great, thanks.
Well, then I may have to log back in. I have the audio, but I can't see what happened. Oh, never mind. I found it again. Now I can see you guys.
Oh, good. Okay, so let's get started here. I think roll call is going to be pretty easy. I'm just going to take notes and take down, the names of folks who are here. And we do have, let's see, total, we have 12 members of the committee, several of which couldn't make it today. So I think another important, thing we have to do in the next week is figure out a meeting time that works for them. A good number of folks. We'll never have everybody, but we can work on that. So to get started, does anybody want to serve as committee chair? Does anyone want to self-nominate or nominate someone else?
I'll nominate myself.
And was that Commissioner Shattuck McNally?
Yes, and curlers and coffee and all.
Great. That sounds great, Jody. Yeah.
Are you good with that then?
I'm great with that. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Any in opposition? Nope. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner.
I'm happy and honored to do it. Thank you.
Great. All right, well, let's get into it then. So legislative committee duties and scope. I'm gonna go back to our legislation and pull up our statutory duty around sort of legislative recommendations. While I do that, does anybody want to open with some broad ideas on how they feel this committee should function with respect to making legislative recommendations?
I think, Angela, it's one of the core new kind of functions of the Forest Health Council, which was missing in the previous version that I was on. We were just advising the state forester. So this is it's a core function. It's really important. We can help guide the Wildfire Matters Review Committee and to create good ideas. And I think it's important, I guess, when if there's a position or a consensus view from the Forest Health Council, that when anyone's speaking to a legislator or a bill or a committee or something, that they reflect the role of that, the Forest Health Council, if that's what they're there for. We ran into some sensitivities in the Fire Commission. At some point, I think you just need to be very clear about what, if you're speaking on behalf of the opinion of the committee or the commission, or you're representing your own opinion or your county's or your agency's opinion. So it's pretty simple, but it's a kind of a ground rule.
I also think it might be important to see how we use a subcommittee to kind of connect or make conversations with all these commissions and other folks doing work, because there's a lot of action happening, and to know how we're all maybe overlapping and where we can maybe work together with these other efforts, I think would be important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to understand, sort of where are the sideboards that this council can really have some influence on.
Do
Can you
we
hear me?
ever,
Sorry, I'm like using my phone audio and I'm not sure how to make it work. So I think there's two way. One, I think this committee could sort of regularly keep an eye on what's happening during the current legislative session and prioritize like what might need to be shared with the full commission. And then I think also similar to what Ben was saying, recommending where there might be places that the commission would, or that the committee would want to weigh in. I think it's going to be tricky because of the limitations that some members will have on testifying or, having to be clear what we represent, that I do think it could be powerful for members of the council to testify on certain high priority pieces of legislation. So we should try to figure out how to facilitate that when we can.
Angela,
Go ahead,
is it-
Pat.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to see if it was appropriate for the subcommittee to even overall, if we see some overlap, to even suggest maybe a potential piece of legislation or to the council that in general, something we see that might be helpful. Because, that's kind of what, starting next week, that work starts again for legislative work for the next session. So just curious about that.
yeah, and I was
And
just,
Jody. Oh, go ahead, Pat.
that's all right, Angela.
Jody, can you rephrase that again? I do think, if I understood your question, there's certainly a role for this committee to make legislative recommendations to the broader council that the council could then either choose to adopt and support as a full council, recognizing that some members may have to recuse themselves if it influences an agency that they work for, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we need to have that conversation about what that means and what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, we make policy recommendations to the council as a whole, but maybe we even see, because of all of our unique perspectives, a piece of legislation that maybe others haven't even thought of because of all of our overlays in different industries and areas and perspectives in this matter, that we might have a unique idea to present going forward. So just to kind of present to the council as whole, something that maybe we have a solution to something that popped up in our conversations or our analysis.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Did I kind of help clear that up, or am I confusing? It's Friday. I think I've slept. I was only gone 40 hours, so it was a quick turnaround trip. So I'm pretty tired.
No, that makes total sense.
I do think that's a great comment, because that's one thing that I saw the Wildfire Commission do pretty effectively was, sort of inform and help generate legislation when we, in the previous iteration of the Forest Council, weren't really able to do that. So I do think it's an important role if things come up.
Pat, did you have a comment?
I did, but I think it's already been covered. Thanks, Angela.
Great. So I'm just going to share my notes here to make sure I'm capturing everything that folks have said. And I also pulled out our ledge language, which is pretty straightforward. Let me see here. It's hard not having a mouse. Okay, can everybody see that? Great. So, so yeah, in legislation, our duty is pretty specific. Development of legislative and regulatory recommendations for policies that could support wildfire mitigation and forest restoration goals. And Paige, I like your suggestion about updating the council as well on current legislation activities, because that's always challenging for anybody to monitor. It's not doing it full time. Anything that we're missing, you think, from kind of the scope and duties of this committee?
Do we need to specifically call out the engagement with Wildfire Matters Review Committee? Maybe that's assumed
That's a
in
good
what's written, but
No, I mean, it's probably useful to get into the kind of mechanics, right?
yeah. One other thought I just had too, along those same lines, Wildfire Matters Review Committee usually does 2 tours, I think. And so it might be good. I feel like that's really like a prime moment. I mean, Paige, like, man, TNC has been great at that, like engaging with the committee on showcasing, certain sites throughout the state. And I think that's really a good opportunity to get FaceTime with them and engage and have that dialogue for a long amount of time. So that may even be something we offer to the committee. I don't know how you all feel about that. I know planning tours is a pain, but I think a lot of times in my experience, it's been worth it. So that may be something too. I know whenever the committee wants to do a tour, I feel like at least Denver Water folks, like we all scramble to figure out really quickly, like where to go. And so that's almost something that would be helpful to have like some dialogue or thought about maybe suggesting a few places for the committee to see. Yeah, what do you guys think? I don't know. Is that a bad idea? Is that too much work?
It is a lot of work, but I think that we could at least talk about it,
Yeah.
with the committee and just say, is there a subgroup of the committee that would be interested? I mean, as you know, Christina, I think our 2 organizations are involved in it every year anyway.
Right.
So if we wanted to, offer maybe like a couple different options, since Wildfire Matters is statewide and the commission statewide, maybe we want to have sort of a range and a West Slope
Yeah.
option or something.
I think it would be it would be time well spent to be involved in helping plan that and selecting the tour sites or locations. It leads to the concepts that they deal with in proposed bills, and if we can help, that will have hopefully some. The outcome could be more productive than. I was pretty confused by some of the bill titles and concepts that came out this year.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how folks feel about, so making recommendations to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee is pretty straightforward. And then obviously within the legislative process, the agencies themselves, will work on decision items generally, earlier on in the process. So obviously for us, that's sort of been happening over the last month. I'm curious what this council sees as its role in terms of potentially sort of making recommendations directly to the agencies or having conversations with them. And I realize this won't necessarily be relevant until sort of this time next year, but I'm just curious if folks have thoughts on that.
Can you say your question again?
Sure thing. So making some recommendations to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee seems fairly straightforward. And I think we can also have conversations about what it looks like to make recommendations to the legislature more broadly. But given that the council's duties are also to make recommendations sort of to the governor and thereby to the executive branch agencies, I'm curious what all of your thoughts are on sort of what that process might look like, whether it is making recommendations directly to governor's staff, who work on natural resource management issues, or if it is making recommendations, to the head of DNR, to the head of the State Forest Service. I'm just curious if folks have any thoughts on that and the timing sort of in the year at which that might be useful.
What do you think, Angela? I mean, I know you're guiding this conversation, but I think you're in a good position to know. I mean, if what cycle of the year the different levels of input would be useful. I guess to advise both the state forester and DNR and the governor potentially and the legislature. It's a big, like wide-ranging sort of thing. It would help to have like an overview of all the kind of strategy and new programs or existing programs that from each department that affect or might affect forest health, and it may even include CWCB or something at some point, and which is thankfully within DNR, right? So it'd be nice to hear from Matt McCombs and from Dan when they would, what the cycle of the year would be useful for them to receive what type of input on what type of program. We've heard about COSWAP. We've heard from Matt McCombs about the nursery bill and some other things, but he is also so new that he may be getting, I think he has a good handle on his strategy and the programs and where he wants to go. It'd be good to hear from him first what he might need. A broad perspective from this council on.
Yeah, I
So
think
it
that's
seems
great.
like,
Oh, go ahead, Paige.
well, I was just going to say, I mean, I do think if we are going to advise the Wildfire Matters Committee, and since we were appointed by the governor, it does make sense that whatever we're recommending should be sort of at least previously shared with and discussed with the state agency representative. So I think that totally makes sense. I think the question will be, and maybe we test this over the summer, is can this council come together around, maybe like a small suite of priorities? And what would it look like to figure out what those things are? Because it's a pretty big, it's a pretty big committee with a lot of different issues. And so I have seen these kind of committees can be pretty influential, and even talking with the congressional delegation if there are federal issues. But it depends on us actually being able to kind of come together around, probably a small group of priorities that we really all want to push forward. So I think that will be, what we could work on maybe over the summer is, can we figure out what priorities our group shares and would be willing to advocate for collectively.
I completely agree, Paige. I think that was, I don't have any value to add to that, except just, I completely agree that I think that would benefit the committee, that would benefit, the agencies as well as the legislators, understanding what our federal priorities are, what we're all aligned on, and then running that through the agencies prior to engaging with, any legislators or the committee. I think that's a really good strategy, and I think that's exactly what people are hoping for from the council. So thank you. I think that was great.
Yeah, I totally want to echo Paige's comments. That's exactly what I was thinking as well. And Angela, I'm glad you asked that question, because I was thinking about, well, we're appointed by the governor. Shouldn't we be kind of talking to him first before we do anything else? So we talked to the council in general, and then to either to Dan and then to the governor, or how does that, do we need to ask for a process in our council of how the process of how we make recommendations and who hears them first? And so maybe we need to suggest a process, and I don't know what that looks like from the council. But Paige, I think you're spot on. really spot on.
It's a great point. I know when like Mike Morgan updates legislature, they always get something first. Or maybe it goes through the governor's office first, but I'm assuming that if we are talking with the state forester and with the director of DNR, that is basically talking to the governor. And they update him in the cabinet meetings. So I don't anticipate one-on-one or direct to the governor necessarily, but that might be, if that happens, that'd be great too. But when we talk to the cabinet level members, I assume we're essentially talking to the gov.
Yeah, these are great ideas, and these are questions that I can pose to, to the leadership of those agencies to get their take, because I think that is a really important question to answer first. And then in terms of sort of timeline and process, part of me thinks it might be useful to, if we can get to the point where we have some recommendations that the council agrees on, try to aim to have those recommendations revised and approved by the council twice a year. And I say twice a year because obviously things can change really quickly. One large fire that has a certain impact can change legislative priorities pretty substantially. And then, legislation that passes in the leg session can also change where we need to potentially invest resources or create new programs. So, kind of off the top of my head, I would think the council would want recommendations ready for the Wildfire Matters Review Committee in the summer. And I can do some digging on sort of their schedule and when that might make sense. They're meeting usually from sort of July to October, I believe. Anyone feel free to correct me on that, but to have them ready for that council or that committee. And they generally, I think, make bill decisions by sort of the end of August, early September, or at least early decisions. And then I would recommend having, additional recommendations prepared in the winter time, sort of January-ish. That's when agencies generally start thinking about out-year priorities.
I wonder if we could prepare some kind of survey for the committee membership about different issues and, or different barriers, or just to try to tease out what people are thinking are issues or opportunities that are ripe for legislative action. And maybe we could start with categories or, and then leave it open-ended. But I think sort of getting that, and then maybe we could figure out, these seem like common interests across, all the different entities that are represented. And that would help us, I think, maybe develop some concepts or, focus our discussion.
I think that's a good
We
idea.
also need to take a lens. Yeah, it's a good idea. I was wondering also, do we need to take a landscape view of after this legislation session is over and when the dust settles and see actually what has transpired and kind of get a list of the federal and state legislation or priorities or funding that's all there, just so everyone kind of has an overview of what actually has happened and where things are at. Because even today, knowing that we're adding, what has it been, 6 million to forest mitigation work, I think, or co-swap, and some of those numbers, that's all happening in the last 24 hours. So a lot of people may not know about that. So how do we try to get that so everyone on the council knows the landscape and what's transpired? And even at the federal level, seems like things are changing. I hear there's going to be a big announcement on Monday, because I just left the broadband conference, and there's some huge announcement happening on Monday about broadband. I don't know exactly the details, but it could be huge. So it just feels like things are happening so fast. It's really important to have maybe a point of on either a spreadsheet or something where everyone can kind of say, where is that at now? Or where do we have this funding here or what, what laws or funding was passed in the legislature since we still have 4 days left and there's a lot going on. So just curious about that because I feel like it helps me if I understand all the moving pieces.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that in a large way, I mean, all this new funding, all these new opportunities, a large part of our role might be to advise or find ways to, find the capacity or identify, prioritize where that money should go, or if there are any kind of bottlenecks in how it gets rolled out, how do we solve those? Some of the funding certainly involves capacity building, and that has been a bottleneck before. So capacity building in state forest service and DNR to administer all this new money is critical. I think I see a role for the Forest Health Council to play in that discussion.
I agree with you, Ben, and I'm thinking about the current legislation. They don't mention the Forest Health Council having some input or say. So in hindsight, is that something that we need to make? I don't know, is that a role or guidance, or how does that fit, right? And where do we fit in that?
Yeah, it's kind of a matter of we have to kind of go where we're needed at this point on an annual basis. And right now, I think the need is going to be expediting, rolling out efficiently the best use of all of these new resources.
But in the legislation, sometimes they say, well, this is going to be, viewed by the Wildfire Commission or this commission. Do we need to have ourselves stated in some of this legislation, or is it just part of the process? I'm just curious, because if there's all this funding, or is the DNR, and we advise the DNR and the governor, or what does that look like? How does that fit? And do we need to have a mention? I'm just curious if we want to have a say.
I think that could be an option. I would also say that the Committee on Leveraging Resources, which is meeting on Monday, at least in terms of their duties, I think their duties are fairly clearly to help make recommendations around ensuring programs can leverage each other, state to federal, et cetera. But, so that's sort of one way in terms of they should feel, I think, empowered to help make some of those recommendations to the broader council. But yeah, I think we could certainly explore referencing the Forest Health Council more explicitly in some of these programs. If you all feel like, there is the bandwidth and you want to make that commitment, to play a specific role in certain programs.
We might want to compare notes after that committee gathers initially and just see, because I do think there's a lot of crossover between legislation and policy and leveraging resources. So I would definitely want us to be coordinated. And I do think, to Ben's point, that a lot of what we might want to be thinking about right now is what are the barriers to effectively deploying all the resources in a strategic way. That it's a worry of mine that there's less of money being, made available for forest-related work right now, and there's a lot of, not through any bad intent, but there's a lot of potential for it to just kind of get scattered or not necessarily invested in ways that leverage each other. So, or that we don't want it to kind of flounder because, as Ben said, like you don't have the right capacity in the right place to take advantage of it quickly. So.
Yeah, and to Paige's point, I think policy sometimes can be a bigger factor in how these things roll out than the legislation itself. And do we see ourselves having a a role in that policy realm? And if we do, what is it? And I think Jody said earlier, you know, something about making connections with other committees and things, and we ought to think about how we can be most effective in doing that.
Yeah, I just want to use an example. We were working on a transformational homeless center for teenagers that are in foster homes are aging out of care, and then they end up kind of struggling. And we were working on that, looking at with some of the state folks, and then this other group in Loveland started saying that they wanted to be seeing this done, and so they were working on it. We were working on it, and then everyone was doing this work, not knowing that we're all trying to solve the same problem. So in 2 weeks, I'm convening them all in the same room and saying, how can we fix this? Because, you know, we're all like spinning our wheels in our separate silos. So, I mean, that's what I really hate to see that happen with this, because there is so many groups. There's, you know, forest health councils are getting this grant. Fire sheds are getting this grant. I mean, there's just a lot happening. It'd be great to just put it all in the same space so we can just look at what's all overlapping.
Could we maybe take a couple minutes here just to identify which other bodies or councils you all would want to sort of have a pulse on in terms of what they're working on, or opportunities to check in with them?
I think that, you know, we had the two presenters, which I was very proud of the Coalition for the Poudre Watershed Committee. They're getting some money and grants. There's the Northern Colorado Fireshed Coalition. There might be other coalitions. There's a big Thompson Watershed Coalition. There's actually a community foundation that's looking at some of this watershed and water protection. So they might be going into some aero mulching. I mean, that might be impactful to know that they're doing that too, because the city of Greeley's been pretty aggressive with going after some of this funding. It might be nice to know what the federal delegation is doing and what money or resources they're bringing. There's, you know, the forest, just in the Forest Service, you know, what they're up to. I mean, they're on the call, but it might be nice to have it all on a spreadsheet or some kind of diagram, interactive diagram that shows where things are at. The Fire Commission, Wildfire Matters Review Committee. I don't know. I'm trying to drink another cup of coffee and think about this, but I mean, we could have a list that we can add and change, but that's just a start. I don't know what other fireshed coalitions or groups are working on things. So in the other parts of the state.
And I think that's something we might be able to ask the new Forest Collaboratives Network to help us track, recognizing, you know, we have limited time here, but they could play a really helpful role, I think, in getting us the information we need from collaboratives. Perhaps same with FACO, the Fire Adapted, oh gosh, what does FACO stand for? Fire Adapted
Colorado.
Colorado, thank you.
Yeah, I think so.
I would maybe throw the CWCB in there if we're thinking about like other boards and commissions that we want to just be aware of relevant. You know, I think the Fire Commission and CWCB, just in terms of other state entities.
And I think too, it's important to recognize what our goal with this is, right? Our goal is just to coordinate and make sure that there's leverage and that people are, you know, not duplicating efforts. It's not to take away individual agency authority, right? Or, you know, I don't know. Now I'm having trouble. I can't remember what FACO stands for.
Fire Adapted Colorado,
No, I just,
I think.
Yeah, I think we're not trying to, you know, take anyone's authority, but maybe if we know what's happening out there, we can support or amplify or spotlight work, right? or even letters of support. I mean, does this council, Forest Health Council, provide letters of support for projects? I've been asked so many the last 2 weeks, like, Commissioner, can you write a letter of support for this little microgrid project? And I said, yes, because that's really important. But, you know, how does the Forest Health Council able to do that? That's another question I have. Or would that come, you know, if we know about these projects, do we support, you know, do we have that ability to support those and lend help for them? And I think that's another thing I'd like to be curious about.
I think that's a great question. And Pat, you might be able to shed some light on this. I feel like RMRI had this conversation for a while, and you know, I think one factor was the agencies had to generally recuse themselves from participating in letters of recommendation. But where did RMRI land on that?
I think you nailed it pretty much, Angela. There with government organizations, they generally can't weigh in and support specifics, especially when it comes to legislation. Projects may be a little bit different, but that also backs them into a bit of a corner. And I think what's the other organization? CAFWA had been through this too, and we kind of found out the same thing through RMRI. And I think where we kind of ended up is that individual members could support projects on an individual basis, but it's really hard to pull in. As an example, DNR it can only support what DNR supports. So.
Yep.
That's great background. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I feel like we have a lot here. I think this committee could stay very, very busy. So it sort of sounds like some action items are to, and I'm hearing a little bit of feedback there. So I will reach out to Matt and Dan and find out what they would like and envision in terms of the sort of order of operations of making recommendations. And so then perhaps where we would go from there would be you all helping to develop sort of a recommended process that we take to the council. And ideally, I think have ready for our July quarterly meeting and have folks vote on it. But before that happens, do we feel like we want to get the ball rolling on investigating, you know, and starting to understand potential legislative recommendations to make to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee this summer?
Yeah, I think that might be good to start because, you know, going forward, the legislators are already thinking about things for next year. So if we're going to have, knowing how much the Forest Health Council is going to meet or this committee, it's something to get proactively ahead of because of the timing and how things can move quickly. But it would be great to get this landscape kind of project and have everyone put in all the different areas and projects to kind of know what's happening. And then also where everything landed after the session's over. And I don't know whether we just have a document, Google document, we all throw in everything we know or learned about that we can kind of look at and digest and kind of add to and change so we can kind of see the overlaps. But I mean, we could sit and talk about it, but it might be nice to have it in a document beforehand to look at. I'm sometimes a visual person, so it's sometimes nice to see it on I don't know, a spreadsheet or a graph or something. I don't know what everyone else thinks about that.
Yeah, I think that's, we may want, if there's a summary of I'd like to make sure that we use our meeting time effectively and thoroughly while we have people's attention. We may want to make sure that we distribute any summaries or program descriptions or questions that are going to be asked to the council, that we distribute those in advance so that people come prepared, having read things, so that we don't spend the whole meeting getting, you know, downloading information, that we can do that in advance if possible. I think that'd be
I
good.
think that's great, Ben.
You know, Angela, Paige mentioned earlier the importance of identifying barriers to getting the work done on the ground. And one of the things that keeps coming up on, no matter what phone call you're on, is this whole workforce capacity issue. And I'm not bringing up that issue as a specific example, but there may be other legislative committees that we need to interact with besides just Wildfire Matters. And I don't have enough background to know who those people are, but I think there's going to be some overlap to make sure that we can roll out the funding and make sure we can get the work done, most importantly.
Great point.
Angela, how often is this group supposed to meet? And then our next full committee meeting is in July? Is that?
That's the plan. So we need to reschedule
Okay.
it because it again conflicts with the Fire Commission on, I think, July 12th or 14th. So we will be doing that rapidly here. We also may do that one in person or hybrid, have a hybrid option. So we're working on that. But I think in terms of meeting cadence, it's really up to you all. Do you feel like monthly meetings are necessary, twice a month, every 2 months? I'll support sort of whatever you think might work the best. And I guess I did ask this in a survey. I can go back and look. I think generally people liked, well, let me go back and look and see what folks said for this one.
I'm just trying to think, and it might vary depending on where we are sort of in this session. Like, I feel like there might be some urgency in, getting a sense of what the issues are that the, committee could come together around, what people see as barriers sort of leading into the, summer field trip and concept development. So we might want to, meet more frequently just to kind of get things going, figure out what we want to work on. And then, I don't think we would need to meet as frequently at other times of the year.
Yeah, good point.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and we can always get some frequent meetings on the calendar, and then you can cancel if necessary.
Do these times work for folks? Because sometimes Friday and Thursdays work better for me than Tuesdays, because that's our main day of administrative meetings and stuff, and it's hard to move that around. But I'm just curious if days of the week work better. If this one seemed to work better for everyone, or are we sticking to this date since that's what we picked today?
I think Fridays are kind of where it has to be. Like, some people have, commissioner meetings on Tuesdays, some have them on Wednesdays. There's always stuff that packs Thursday up. Monday, it's kind of either Monday or Friday, basically, for me, but that's just me. But I think Fridays, then if they are in-person meetings, Fridays would be the goal so that people can travel. But
I have a standing meeting on Friday at 9:30, which I could try to move that other meeting, but if we aren't dead set on 9 o'clock, 8:30 would be really helpful for me.
I could probably do that depending on the day, but that might work better. And I'm trying to take, since I'm doing a lot of weekend work too, I'm trying to take Friday afternoons off. So the earlier the better for me on that. So
Jody, do you want to send a doodle to the rest of the committee members to identify a time that works for them? Or do you feel comfortable as the chair just saying, let's do 8:30 Friday mornings? And I think I might be hearing folks having an interest maybe in twice a month. I don't know if people want more frequently than that or less, at least at this stage. Or monthly.
well, I think maybe a doodle would be nice, just since we have several people that didn't come today, and to honor that, because but I I know you did that one survey, but I just don't know about how that looks. So just curious about that. Trying to get some people and their feedback. But I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I think because we've landed on this day for the subcommittee, we already have that information. Friday seemed to work for everybody because you already did that survey. But if I'm open to moving it back to 8:30. I'm not sure how the rest of the group feels.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Yeah, Fridays are a little bit variable for me, but I think it's probably as good as any like specific day I could say, and 8:30 would be okay. Earlier would be hard just because I have, well, in the summer it won't because I had to have different kids schedule, but 8:30 is okay.
We said twice a month or
Yeah, I mean, what do you all think? What do you feel like you need to potentially have some recommendations, let's say by August?
do we feel, I think you mentioned earlier that maybe in certain parts of the year it is needed to be twice a month and maybe other just once a month, or maybe over the holidays in December we don't need to meet. I don't know. So, but I think it's easier for me to maybe get them on the calendar and then cancel them than trying to move things around. I don't know how everyone else feels. Much rather,
Yeah,
yeah. So
I would agree with that.
So it might be good just to put it on as 2, and then we can always give everyone an extra day or extra hour in their day. So, but I think to Ben's point, being prepared, so we use that time wisely, and we could keep it to the hour or less. Then we can honor everyone's time and actually get some work, get some really good work done. So. That's kind of what I was thinking, but I hate to speak for everyone else, but I don't know, we could put out a doodle or we can maybe just make recommendations to the rest of the committee and see what kind of, we have these recommendations and then get feedback from the committee. Because I think what happens with doodle polls, we put them out and then there's always 1 or 2 people that don't ever respond and we kind of drag it out, but it feels like we need to kind of maybe start getting some meetings on the calendar. So what are the thoughts?
I like the idea of just sending out a recommended time and, if there are 2, have people respond if they have a major conflict and then we can deal with it that way.
So would everyone be good with sending this, what she's typing, meeting for consent deadline? And just get feedback from the subcommittee as a whole? And then also see what the other committee is doing. So what do you think about those recommendations?
I think that's good. I would say in periods of the year, it's going to be cyclical, and there's probably times when at most once a month would be my preference. But like right now, early stages of where we are with the Forest Health Council, it may make sense initially to do 2 times a month, if possible. But other times of the year, we might want to just not have any.
So Angela, when we have this document that maybe we're looking at, throw everything in and look at, is that with our open meetings? Because this is kind of an open meeting. Is that an open meeting document? And if we're in there adding things to it, even if it's just informational, right? So we can add things to it as long as we're not making a policy discussion or making a decision. We're just adding information. We should be able to do that without having a meeting, correct?
Correct. And so I think I talked with our AG staff about this. There's a fine line between what sort of needs to be done publicly versus not. And I think we have a couple of ways to do this. I think, we have a few versions of sort of what you're talking about floating around already that I can sort of put together as a first cut. And then, each of you can individually sort of contribute your own as sort of a red line, send it back to me. I basically compile it all. The other thing that I think could work, again, given this is all publicly available information, is we could create a shared doodle or shared Google Doc that is actually also shared publicly and linked to on our website. Because in my mind, that's not terribly different than, for instance, for CoSwap, we did develop a little grants database. It's just a spreadsheet again. It's publicly available and we just update it as we can. So yeah, I think either could work.
What's nice about that, Angela, is you can set up this group to edit, right? And other people just to view. And so I think that's a really nice idea. It doesn't create extra work.
Yes, I think that's right. And I'm sort of wondering if our first, so I realize we only have a couple minutes left here. What are your preferences in terms of priorities for, let's say, our meeting 2 weeks from now? Would you rather have, I might be able to get Alice in to do a legislative review, or Carolyn Asplin from the State Forest Service, which, you know, could take the bulk of the meeting? Or would you rather I sort of mock up, and we might be able to kind of do both, but I could mock up a draft of this sort of all programs spreadsheet, because I think we'll have to have a conversation about what columns to have, you know, like what information do you want? Do you want details on program eligibility? Do you want, you know, specific funding amounts annually? How many years? You know, there's a lot of there are many details you could include.
I think it would be great to have a legislative sort of recap at our next meeting, just to understand what happened over the legislative session and sort of what the impact is on, you know, things that are under our purview. And then maybe we could start talking about how to both share that information and survey the membership about things they'd be interested in exploring for next year or keep remaining barriers.
Should we bump that meeting back to the 27th just for Alice and them, just to give them a little bit of time to kind of recover and provide all the information at the end? Because that is only about a week after the session's over, and I'm sure they're going to try to sleep a little bit. At least, because I don't know about some of you, but I know some of the sessions been going till 1 or 2 in the morning. So I don't know what if everyone looks at the 27th. I know that's the Friday before Memorial Day, but and what everyone thinks about that. I do have sometimes I have the No Code Places 2050 meetings on once a month on Fridays. They start at 8:30, but usually I can jump in late. So if this is just going to be an hour meeting, I can always go to that late because I have staff in that meeting. But I was thinking just to be kind of honoring the time and thinking about the staff. It might be hard for them to pull it all together in a week, but I don't know what you thought about that.
I do think that's a great
I
point.
have a conflict on the 27th, so, but I'm just one person.
Well, I know it's Memorial Day weekend, so that's why I wanted to kind of be thought about that too. But we could still keep on the 20th. I'll just have to make sure our meeting ends on time so I can jump on to my No Code Places 2050.
Jody, I can ask Alice and Carolyn if they feel like that's doable for them on the 20th.
That'd be great.
All right, so we only have a couple minutes left here. I did throw in the agenda, or in the meeting calendar, in the what's it called, in the calendar information. I threw in just a PDF slide of some of the bills that have been moving through this session. So feel free to take a look at that. It's already quite outdated. You know, it's 2 weeks old, and there's been a ton happening in the last week, but hopefully it gives you kind of a flavor for what's been happening this session. You know, feel free to reach out to us if you have any specific questions about it. Anything else that folks want to make sure we cover before we break?
No, thanks. This has been great. Great to see you.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Angela and everyone. And we have a chair. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jody.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. And Jody, I'll be in touch with you. We'll sort of figure out administrative duties in terms of, you know, who does what. And yeah, make sure.
Yeah, I figured that. I thought, okay, I better make sure I know exactly what all the duties are. I tend to think about that afterwards. So thank you, Angela.
Yeah, no problem. I think, you know, just to set the stage, I think in future meetings, I'll have you actually chair the meetings and work through the agenda and help me develop the agenda. And I can support taking notes.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's more than fine. I'm still trying to wake up. So it was a rough light. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining, getting home late last night. Great. Well, I'll send around these notes. And Jody, perhaps I'll send you the email list of members and perhaps you can be the one to propose the 8:30 meetings.
Sure, that would be great. Let's talk and help me kind of, get a list of what I need to do and follow through with. That'd be great.
Sounds good. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Happy Friday.
Have a great
So-
weekend.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
You
guys.
too. Bye bye.
It's going to be an exciting day.
Let's see.